nearly 30 years later, that I just totally had a total mental breakdown. I just totally lost it. I just couldn't function. And I was in another relationship at that stage, and fortunately, my partner at that stage rang around a few people, some ex-service organisations, to see if they could help her to help me. And the Vietnam Veterans Federation actually got me admitted to the Toowong Psychiatric Hospital under care of a psychiatrist, and that was 1997. And that's where my life started to turn around. I finally got treatment. First of all, it was I was medicated so that I could sort of get it on an even keel, so that I could understand and accept the therapy that they offered. So I spent quite a lot of time in the hospital and afterwards receiving therapy, and I guess it probably very early 1998, I found that I could function to such a degree that I wanted to help the people that helped me. So I went to them and I said, look, I'd like to volunteer. I'd like to help other people. And that was in 1998, and I've been doing it ever since.
Thank you very much. Our next plenary session will start with a presentation by Major General Adam Findlay, and the topic is Leading Cultural Change to Improve Mental Fitness in the ADF. Major General Adam Findlay graduated from the Royal Military College, Duntroon, in 1987. He has served regimentally in the 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, and the Special Air Service Regiment. He commanded the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, and the 7th Combat Brigade. He is deployed in operations in East Timor, twice in Afghanistan, and twice to Iraq. He was promoted to Major General and assumed the appointment of Special Operations Commander Australia on 29 June 2017. He was awarded a PhD in Military History from the University of New South Wales in 2014 and is a Fellow of the Harvard Business School. Major General Findlay was appointed a member of the Order of Australia in 2006 for his command of the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, and awarded a US Legion of Merit for his command of the Special Operations Joint Task Force, a deployment from which he has just returned. Please welcome Major General Adam Findlay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It looks a bit like church out there. Everybody's at the back and no one's at the front. So I've been picked to represent actually the Chief of Defence Force. And when the Chief of Defence Force asked, because he just couldn't be here because of his incredibly busy timetable, I said I want to go because I've had a wonderful relationship with all the ex-service organisations, particularly in Brisbane, as the commander of the 7th Brigade. And it's good to see old faces around here as I've come back to Brisbane. But as a commander of Australian soldiers for 30 years now, I've been privileged to command at a lot of levels, and I feel pretty passionate about our soldiers. And I think I'm so encouraged by the attendance of all of the experts here today and the work that you're doing to support our soldiers, sailors, airmen and airwomen who we routinely put in harm's way. And as a commander, I feel ethically bound to do the best thing by the soldiers we put into those situations. So welcome everybody, and as I said, thank you for your interest, and I'm actually really excited to present on behalf of the CDF. It is a great privilege as a military commander to come to a forum that's dedicated to dealing with the difficult issue of mental health and progressing the understanding of Australians in how we deal with these conditions. Whilst I have a military focus, I see very much that our soldiers are part of a wider Australian society. Forums such as these are critical. They enhance our understanding and they further our ability to render better and more targeted assistance. As a commander of Australian soldiers, I'm intimately aware that we do not currently have all the answers. Oftentimes, we are left watching our personnel as these issues manifest. And we as commanders, and I say that about all the senior leadership of the ADF that I deal with on a daily basis, we have concerns about the welfare of our soldiers and how best we can support them with our current and also into our future treatment. Also, I'm very privileged to bring with me the Special Operations Command team that's here today. And what I want to do now is just to point them out to you. I'd really like you to reach out from your respective disciplines to meet these wonderful soldiers and academics. First of all, Nick Beeston, if you can stand up, please. So Nick is my Senior Health Officer in Special Operations Command. We have Warrant Officer Brett Murdoch. Brett, if you can stand up. He's a combat veteran. He runs a lot of resilience training in our Commando organisation. He's supported by Gemma King. Gemma, if you can stand up, please. She is a PhD student. There's a lot of work on cortisol and stress in our soldiers. We have Matt Cardinells. Matt, please stand up. Another combat veteran. He is a mentor to a lot of our injured and ill soldiers in the 2nd Commando Regiment, being a combat veteran himself and having come through a recovery from a mental illness. We have Captain Paula Dabovich. Paula, if you can stand up, please. I would commend a number of Paula's academic papers on sense of self and transitioning out of Defence Force with that, so please make yourself familiar to Paula. And lastly, Warrant Officer Paul Dunbaven, known colloquially as POM. He is the senior soldier within the Special Operations Command, just as I'm the senior officer. So please get yourself known to these people here and please cross-pollinate as best you can. Mental health issues, awareness of conditions such as post-traumatic stress and suicide prevention are matters of national importance. ADF members who experience mental health problems, mental illness or suicidality can do and will lead meaningful and productive lives. They can, we've seen it. But what we do know is that seeking help early leads to improved outcomes. And that's one of the challenges we face in the Special Operations Command, but also in the wider ADF. Now, this is important. We have to have a narrative together, and an organisation like this needs to help us craft a very careful narrative. And this is what we're finding in the Defence Force. The research has shown that exposure to trauma through deployment on operations does not increase the risk of mental disorder. And the stats to prove it, and my team can talk offline with you. So not everybody who deploys in operations comes out with PTSD. And that's an awful stigma for my soldiers as they transition to civilian life. In fact, a small minority of our soldiers experience trauma. I'll talk more about that in suicide statistics, sadly, later in this presentation. We are studying the effects of trauma and deployment on mental health to see if this actually holds true, whether it's just a feature of the last 18 years of continuous combat operations, and see how we go into our 2nd decade of combat operations. And in 2010, research showed that Defence members, particularly in the younger age groups, may experience exposure to trauma and mental health problems prior to and during their service, even if they do not deploy. We recognise that due to the nature of the delayed onset of PTSD or the stigma related to mental health issues, some members may not identify the symptoms before leaving or may not experience the PTS symptoms until they have left Defence. As such, we have identified the need for further research into the transitioned population and, importantly, the needs to examine their pathways to care, particularly those that we identified with mental health issues back in the study in 2010. To reduce the stigma, we are open and honest about the research findings we have within Defence, and you heard Tracy Smart talk earlier today about the upcoming mental health strategy. This data helps us better understand the profile of mental health, mental illness and suicide within the Australian Defence Force, and it ensures that we will tailor programs and allocate resources in a better way to increase the likelihood of personnel accessing the right care at the right time. We don't downplay the impact of the demands of military service on individuals and their families. I'm not saying that. Individuals and families' lived experience of mental health problems or mental disorder can be complicated and affected by many factors, only some of which are solely from service in the military. But it's a complicated brew. So where have we, just here with where we come from, thanks technical. So where has defence come from? We released our first ADF mental health strategy in 2002. This was followed by the Dunt Review into mental health in 2009, which indicated that the ADF mental health strategy compared favourably with other militaries which we benchmarked against and other Australian workplaces. But also highlighted there was much more work to be done. The government of the day funded a 4-year ADF mental health care reform program to implement all of the 52 recommendations of the Dunt Review. Since then, Defence has followed a process of continual improvement to implement the advances in the provisions of mental health care in support of Defence members. This has seen an investment of $257 million in mental health services and support since 2009. The ADF Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy, released in 2011, and the Supporting Action Plan, released in 2012, set the priority actions through to the end of 2015. And there are many initiatives that were undertaken. I'll give you some of the examples that you'll all be familiar with, I'm sure. Annual ADF Mental Health Day, mental health, alcohol and suicide awareness programs to help mental health literacy. Education to address the negative perceptions that mental health conditions will have an effect on your career. Encouraging members to talk about their experiences overcoming PTSD in order to encourage others, current and ex-serving's, to seek the same support and treatment. To establish the ADF Centre for Mental Health, to provide mental health consultancy services training and upskilling of mental health workforce, and to improve the mental health advice to commanders such as myself and my peers. And as you heard, and there is a draft available on Tracy's computer, we are now in the final stages of consulting with all the stakeholders prior to the launch of the 2017 to 2022 Defence Mental Health Wellbeing Strategy. That's where we've come from, and this is what is happening. The 2010 ADF Mental Health Prevalence and Wellbeing Study showed that 1 in 5 of the ADF population experienced a mental disorder in the previous 12 months, which is similar to the rate of the Australian community. Over half of the ADF experienced an affective anxiety or alcohol disorder at some stage in their lives, either before or during their military service, which is actually slightly higher than the Australian community at large. Research reported that an estimated prevalence of 12-month PTSD among ADF members is around 8%, compared with a community rate of 5%. Of those ADF members with a diagnosable condition of PTSD, approximately 50% reported having received treatment in the previous 12 months. Still a figure that's much too low. The ADF recognises categorically that exposure to trauma through military service can increase an individual's risk of developing mental disorder. However, most ADF members will not go on to develop PTSD. It must also be said that deployment alone, while significant, is not the sole determinant for all of the, in the development of mental illness. The vast majority of ADF members who deploy do not report any disorder, either before or after deployment. However, for some, the experience of deployment, and in particular those related to close combat, can be extremely traumatic. These findings are often met with disbelief by the general public. Independent research shows that there's no increased prevalence of mental disorders in members who have deployed in operations compared to those who have not. For example, research into Australian Defence Force personnel over the period from January 2000 to September 2017 has shown that 129 full-time personnel, sadly, are suspected or to have confirmed to have died by suicide. So we know that over a 17-year span, sadly, 129 people we have lost their lives to suicide. 66 of that 129 had never deployed. This, of course, does not mean we pay any less attention to those who have deployed. Of course it doesn't. Or who've been exposed to trauma and who have developed a mental illness. The fact is we're interested in the mental health and well-being of all our personnel in a longitudinal manner throughout their career, from recruitment through their service life and during transition out of Defence Force and their reintegration back into civilian life. The focus of our programs is on our people and their families. It's about ensuring that our people maintain mental fitness at different times in their careers and feel capable and supported in accessing effective treatment at the earliest opportunity. Defence and DVA have been working with the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare to improve our understanding of the incident of suicide in serving and ex-serving ADF members. Building on preliminary results that were released in November of 16 and updated results that were released in June of this year, which showed the rate of suicide for serving members is significantly lower than the broader Australian population. In fact, it's 53% lower. So while you're serving, the rate of suicide for serving members is significantly lower than the Australian average. When it's compared with all Australian men, it is a men's study, and after adjusting for age. We don't know yet whether these results indicate that some of our strategies for suicide prevention are working and the other protective factors we put in place, but it's at least a trend that we can at least get a handle on and try to improve these statistics. Now, however, in the ex-serving group, the people who've transitioned out of the ADF, with the same statistical levelling out, it's 14% higher than the Australian norm for men. So this highlights to us in Defence the importance of the transition process out of the ADF and affirms a strong collaborative approach that Defence and DVA are putting in place to improve the support of individuals leaving the ADF. We're now starting to hone in on this being the critical area for increased study. For example, due to the unique nature of service in Special Operations Command, it has been acknowledged that the further work may be required to prepare our personnel for transition out of service. The command soldiers, after being specially selected, trained and then sustained at significantly heightened operational tempo for the duration of their military careers to date, we had been separating our personnel out without any additional preparation or education. You know, borrowing from the pioneering work of someone like Rick Ralph here in Brisbane. This month, SOCOM, Special Operations Command, will conduct the inaugural Outright program to provide up to 15 members of SOCOM with the education, civilian employment opportunities and coping strategies to assist them to adjust to civilian society and the significantly different tempo of life that they will experience. It is hoped that this deliberative transition process may reduce the incidence of mental health conditions that can occur when people separate from the tight-knit community of special operators. And then we hope to export this trial and our lessons learnt to the wider Army and the wider ADF. There's a delicate balance to be achieved. Soldiers, sailors, airmen and women need to understand that we take very seriously our responsibility to prepare them for the uncertainty of the environment of military service, and that we'll provide them with the necessary support if they struggle following their service. But at the same time, we need to ensure that our personnel do not feel that undertaking our warfighting tasks will automatically result in them developing a mental health condition such as PTSD. We need your support because of your wider access in this helping us have this very delicate narrative about some of these truths that are starting to emerge. To maintain this balance, we need to ensure that our approach to improving mental health and well-being is through building resilience, and it's great to see so many topics today on resilience, supporting rehabilitation, focusing on recovery and providing recognition of our people's service. This slide is taken from the 2nd Commando Regiment selection process. Special Operations Command utilises a thorough selection process to screen potential candidates, as you'd expect. Part of this process is utilisation of the behaviourally anchored rating scales, or BARS, to assess behavioural characteristics. BARS considers adaptability, maturity, mental toughness, self-discipline, trainability and team orientation that we require to prevail on the battlefield against our enemies. And has been shown to deliver SOCOM with a resilient individual with mental health prevalence rates significantly lower than the rest of the conventional army. A sign of the ADF's growing maturity in addressing mental health issues as an organisation and among our people is that our approach has grown from being seen purely as a health or clinical care response to now ensuring that mental health considerations are increasingly part of our command and leadership training, personnel management and human performance considerations. And the way we encourage defence members to look out for each other. We've also recognised the good mental health and well-being of all our people, military and civilian, contributes of course to our operational capability and defence outputs, and is also good for the quality of life of our individuals and their families and the wider community. In recent years in the ADF, we have engaged in a very serious and transparent conversation across all levels of command, defence members, families, the public, the media, ex-service organisations, about mental health and the well-being of our defence members. Through reviews, parliamentary inquiries, independent research, encouraging high-profile defence members and senior leaders to speak about their experiences, we have informed ourselves and the Australian public of the nature and impact of mental health conditions in the ADF. Where we have not been successful at helping people understand, because it is not easy to accept and goes to the very heart of the stigma associated with mental health, is that it is not only defence members who experience, defence members who have experienced combat and deployment who will experience mental health. It's not only those people. It is everybody in defence. I gave you the statistics for the suicide. So one of the things we're fighting against is soldiers reluctant to come forward because they have not deployed in combat operations and don't feel that they should have these PTSD symptoms. And that's part of that's why the narrative has to be corrected. Previous deployment experience is not apparent in the military careers of the majority of defence members who have suicided whilst in defence. So previous deployment is not apparent. As important as the story of PTSD and deployment is not the full story of mental health issues in the Australian community or the Australian Defence Force. If we are to break down the mental health stigma, there can be no hierarchy in mental health issues. And what I mean by that is, somehow if you deploy in operations, you have a more need for mental health treatment than if you haven't deployed in operations. And that bifurcation is extremely unhelpful in the community of soldiers that I have the privilege to command. We're interested in all of our personnel, no matter the source or the cause of their mental health problems. The job of being a soldier, sailor, airman or woman, like our emergency police service brethren, we heard Darryl before lunch, is difficult and can be violent at times. And many defence members may be exposed to potential stress and traumatic experiences throughout their time in the ADF, regardless of whether deployed or not. Mental health, as you all know, is a complex and difficult issue, and the stigma that many people attach to it is recognised worldwide as a significant obstacle to seeking treatment. Defence recognises there is still some reluctance from some ADF members to seek help for mental health issues, just as there is within the wider Australian community. We know there is much more to be done, but we don't shy away from our responsibility. We accept that we do not get it right all the time, and that some former ADF personnel may feel that the response they receive was not up to standard, or the standard they would expect or deserve. You know, we are committed to learning from these shortfalls to better understand the mental health issues affecting our personnel and using this evidence to ensure we continually improve the way we make right decisions to best support our people. To achieve this, We also need to ensure that we fully understand the type and range of mental health needs experienced by our ADF personnel so we can better target the services and care they require and deserve. In order to do this, we have to continue to undertake research which keeps us better informed. So where are we going? Close collaboration is occurring between Defence and DVA to understand the mental health needs of our contemporary veterans. The Transition and Wellbeing Research Program was launched by the Minister for Veterans Affairs in 2014 and is a significant government investment of about $3 million, well, $5 million over 3 years. It's the largest, most comprehensive program of a study, this type of study in Australia, and it examines the impact of military service on the mental, physical and social health of serving and ex-serving personnel and their families. The Transition and Wellbeing Research Program consists of 3 study components: the Mental Health and Wellbeing of Transition Study, the Impact of Combat Study, and the Family Wellbeing Study, looking at all dimensions. For the first time, this will provide us with a picture of mental health disorders in the initial years after transition from full-time service. It will also investigate how an individual previously diagnosed with mental disorder access to care, how mental health issues change over time, the mental health status of reservists, as well as examining the experiences and needs of families of serving and ex-serving members. Whilst there are higher levels ADF studies and research just as discussed, there's also an appetite for ground-up innovation. An example of this is the Special Operations Command initiative, where we've partnered with the University of Queensland to look at the impact of cortisol excretion under stress. By providing members with education on techniques to help regulate this response, we have seen potential benefits for enhancing mental resilience, cognitive ability under pressure and duress. The potential for a preventative education program to reduce the number of people requiring this treatment is highly appealing to me as a commander. As previously introduced, doctoral candidate and reserve captain Paul Dabovich from the University of Adelaide, who's part of my team today. She's also been undertaking research into healthcare engagement within special operations. Paul's research aims to look at, identify barriers to care that may prevent soldiers from accessing treatment and the sense of loss they feel when they progress through the rehabilitation journey. We've asked people to look closely at the various reviews that have taken place in recent years, and here's some of what these reviews have told us. And importantly, we are actioning. So we're hearing this and we want to get it doing. This is practical outcomes. Focus on the specific mental health and wellbeing requirements of the defence population. Targeting what we're doing. Advocate person-centred and recovery-focused approaches. Focus on stigma and barriers to care, including the cultural aspects of addressing mental health and wellbeing within defence. Avoid the hierarchy of mental illness, i.e. those with conditions caused by operations versus those by non-operations. Broaden stakeholders, like such as yourselves, to include the chain of command. It's a command responsibility. Personnel management and career management within the ADF. Increase the focus on wellbeing and resilience whilst continuing to improve the access to mental health services. Increase the focus on the roles of families in all aspects of mental health and wellbeing. And improve the range and management of rehabilitation transition services with an emphasis on a meaningful engagement and recovery, and if necessary, a dignified transition to civilian employment. Ensure treatment and rehabilitation programs consider the impact of physical health issues on mental health. We found that many soldiers with physical issues develop mental health issues as a consequence. Importantly, really importantly, develop some kind of function to synchronise and prioritise the support services provided by the ex-service organisations. So right now, there is an overwhelming sense of support and positivity and interest. The problem we're having in defence is synchronising all that interest and targeting it best for our soldiers. Within SOCOM, it was identified that soldiers wanted to deal with someone they knew and trusted, and who have lived through the experience of being wounded, ill or injured. The Human Performance Wing, managed by Matt Cardinells, who's here, is our response to this requirement. As a known and trusted agent who's been through his own rehabilitation journey, Matt and his outstanding work has been able to engage a range of SOCOM personnel who might not have otherwise asked for assistance, and he has directly aided in their recovery. So in conclusion, Defence continues to develop strong programs to assist our people, and we remain committed, in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs, the ex-service organisations, research partners and other agencies, to building resilience, improving awareness of suicide prevention and all mental disorders, and encouraging Defence members and their families to seek help as early as possible. As a Defence Force and a community, we are better prepared than we have been following previous wars and conflicts to recognise mental health problems, intervene early and provide effective treatment, and enable Defence members to return to work as soon as is possible, either within or outside the ADF. But there is much, much more work to do. We will achieve this, though, through leadership at all levels of the Defence organisation, promoting the culture, attitudes and behaviours that value mental health and well-being within our workforce. Promoting self-reliance and recognising that seeking formal help as early as possible shows good awareness and good self-health care. By treating our members with a whole-of-service longitudinal approach, not just after they've suffered a catastrophic mental injury. We look at them from recruitment through their service, preparing them for operations, going on operations, returning to workplace, and then eventually all soldiers, sailors, airmen and women must transition into civilian life, and make sure we do that safely. By empowering our people to build trust to overcome the continuing stigma associated with mental illness, so our people and their families, our supervisors, managers and commanders can recognise how to seek and offer help as early as possible, no matter what the cause. By being responsive and ensuring the right mental health care is provided at the right time. Supporting access to person-centred and recovery-focused mental health care, with the express goal of enabling the return to duty or return to work as soon as is possible. Finally, I really would like to thank all of you for being here, for showing interest in something that the senior leadership of the ADF feels passionate about. As someone who's had the privilege to command soldiers overseas in Australia, I'm acutely aware of the issues surrounding mental health illness, the access and the barriers to care, and the long-term impact on individuals, their families and broader community. I applaud you for your collaborative work that you have completed, that you will complete in the future. I implore you to keep working to identify better prevention and treatment programs for my soldiers and for all Australians. Thank you very much.